Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you very much, Bryce, for the wonderful introduction. I'd also like to acknowledge that we're on traditional lands and pay my respects to elders past and present of the Wurundjeri people, and also acknowledge the Bunurong on the other side of the Yarra, who have looked after and cared for this land for thousands and thousands of years. I'd really like to start off by sharing a really quick story, actually. It's a story I picked up. I was lucky enough to travel right around Australia when I was working and doing work when I was representing young people at the UN. And I was in Bunbury, WA, and I was sitting around a coffee table with a wonderful lady called Karen Jetta. She's a Noongar language teacher over there, and she shared this wonderful story. And it's about a man. It's a very long time ago, and she said this man, he was the last person to speak his traditional dialect, and he came from the lands up around the Pilbara and the Kimbleys up there. And he was the last person to speak his traditional dialect. And these young anthropologists and archaeologists, they came up from UWA, and they decided that I'll meet him on the side of the road and I'll sit down and actually talk to him and try and capture some of the language before he passes away and that language is actually lost. And they met him on the side of the road, and I just kind of picture them in white coats, sitting down in the beautiful red soil. I'm not sure if any of you have ever been over that side. But it's this really rich, red, ancient soil. And they sat there, and so he would talk. He would talk in his traditional dialect, and then he'd have to put into a common dialect, which a relation could actually understand, and then his relation would actually translate that back into English. And so you can imagine that was a long process. It was so they'd ask a question, go through the relation into the common dialect to the old man. And the old man would answer twice. So he'd answer in his traditional language, then in the common dialect, and then finally it would come back. And so this is a long process, and they were sitting there for most of the day in the scorching sun. And then finally, one of the young anthropologists, she couldn't kind of hold back, and she just kind of blurted out, "How old are you?" And before the others could stop, it kind of worked its way through that process. And then it came back, and the man said, "I'm 10,000 years old." And they kind of laughed, and they kind of thought, 10,000 years old, how is that possible? And so it got asked, and I went around. And the old man sitting on the road, sitting on the side of the road, pointed to these particular 3 trees in a row. These are boab trees. I'm not sure if anyone has heard of boab trees. I call them nature's water tanks because they've got an amazing round base on them, and they store water. And there's actually, over in South Africa and on Madagascar, they've actually got these same trees, but they call them baobab. And it's actually when the plates are actually connected, and they've got an amazing myths and stories associated with those. But these trees, while they've got a strong and round base to them, they come up with these really gnarly branches that look like kind of twisted hands. And their seed pods are really long drops of seed pods. So when they drop, they actually stick straight into the ground, and another baobab or a boab tree springs from that. And he pointed to these particular 3 on the side, and huge round bases on them. And he said, "These trees, they've been here since the beginning of time. They're part of my dreaming, they're part of my law. They've been here for thousands and thousands of years. They'll be here long after time ceases to exist." And he said, "I've seen other trees grow, from shrubs right up to be tall ambers. I've seen many being struck by lightning and crumble. I've seen many return to dust. I've seen animals come into this land, produce offspring, and that offspring produce offspring, and that offspring produce offspring. And I've seen that offspring pass away and perish and return to the dust. I've seen my own family grow old. I've seen my own family quadruple in size. I've seen them grow old and pass away and return to the dust. But these trees have been here through all that. And next to these trees, I'm not as old as these trees, but I've been the most constant in the surrounding. And so I'm not as old as these trees, but I must be 10,000 years old." And it came back, and I love that story. I really love that story because it tells me 2 things. It tells me that time is so conceptual. That it's really what you can make it. It's what you decide or what you envisage in your own life. It's time. It's fluid. And it also tells me the importance of preserving culture. It tells me the importance of kind of sharing culture, and the idea that culture is a living thing. And even to this day, that this culture still remains in Australia, and it's living. And the reason why I want to share that story with you is because I'm going to talk about where we are in Australia today. So 2013. In 2008, we saw the Closing the Gap targets set by COAG, which was addressing disadvantage in Australia. So looking at Indigenous and non-Indigenous life expectancy and that gap between there. So looking at, and also education outcomes, and how young Aboriginal people are not graduating or completing high school at the same rates as non-Indigenous people. That our own families are passing away 11 years before non-Indigenous families. And that's an issue that I personally am concerned about, seeing my father's just turned 55 and my mother has also just turned 56. But then I look at my grandmother, born in South Australia. She drove cattle right around through Baker's Marsh, all the way up around Wagga, back around to Bordertown, South Australia, and she's 97. And so she's kind of like kicking goals. She's amazing. But then I think about the issues that we face still today in 2013. And I think, these targets were set for a reason, because we want to achieve this. We want to bring our lives, we want to bring everything back to parity. We want to be on the same level as non-Indigenous people in regards to our health, our education, our employment rates. And that's something that I'm really passionate about and something I really believe in. But I'm very idealistic, and I don't think about tomorrow or the next day. I kind of think about what happens in 5 years, what happens in 14 years, what happens in 20 years. So I'd like us to kind of just take a journey. And now I'm standing in 2020. So most of these targets have been met. So we're looking back, we're seeing that the life expectancy is on par. We're seeing graduation or education rates are the same. We're seeing that health outcomes are on the same. We're seeing our Aboriginal people that are stepping up, leading business, leading leaders in their own communities, are driving their own business, are really contributing and on the same footing as non-Indigenous people in Australia. And that's something that's really amazing, and it's a vision that I very much believe in, and I really believe that we're going to achieve this. At the beginning of the year, I started an initiative called the Visionarium, and it was kind of born out of this frustration, this dissatisfaction with our current political cycle, the rhetoric that's out there, the mudslinging, the frustration of this debate that continues today in regards to refugees and asylum seekers, in regards to gender equality, in regards to same-sex marriage. This frustration of this debate that just continues to rage, and we're not seeing much progress. And one part of me was, while I'm idealistic, I also think I have a lot of hope in people. I have a lot of hope that our politicians don't actually reflect the majority of what we actually believe in ourselves. And so the Visionarium was born out of that idea that whilst at our national level, our leaders aren't really portraying a vision, I really feel that we as individuals, we as young people, we as older people, have a vision for what we'd like to see in Australia. And so this Visionarium brought together about 50 people, and out of that, they shared what their vision was. And it's amazing how common and how similar a lot of these visions actually were for where we'd like to see Australia in the future. And just up on here on the projector, these are just some of the words that continue to come out of these responses of where we'd like to see Australia. And so you can see equality, really jumping off the page there, respect, fair. Behind Sam, there's educated, inclusive, welcoming, generosity. For me, these are amazing values that we should believe in. These are amazing values that we all share right across Australia. And in 2020, these are the values that I hope our country, our wonderful nation, is currently the 12th strongest economy in the world, actually share right across. And our our leaders actually represent these values. The future for Australia, I really believe, is bright. I'm optimistic. I really believe that equality is going to be something that is something that's going to lead us into the future. I really believe that respect is the underlying element of everything that we do. And the reason why I wanted to share early on about this old Aboriginal man is because this idea that this old Aboriginal man was 10,000 years old is this idea that there's the level of knowledge that continues to be passed down. So this old Aboriginal man, his totem was his grandfather's totem. And his grandfather's totem was his grandfather's totem. And for generations and generations, this particular knowledge about these baobab trees had been passed down. And so this man may not have been 10,000 years old, but the knowledge that he had and the knowledge that he held was 10,000 years old. And I really believe our education system doesn't necessarily reflect the idea of sharing knowledge. A teacher of mine, he said, the one way to achieve true immortality is to share knowledge. And in the future that I see for Australia is a nation that really understands that there is amazing knowledge that is being held in this land. There's amazing knowledge that is held in its people, and there's amazing knowledge that is held in every single one of you. And it's a matter of where do we share that. And while the Visionarian was a platform, I really believe that platform happens in everyday life. I really believe that these interactions, these small interactions, you leave a mark on someone. And that's that sharing your knowledge. There's a wonderful quote by Pericles, and he says, what we leave behind is not what's carved into stone monuments, but what's woven in the hearts of others. And there's been an amazing array of stories that kind of make up this tapestry that I've seen and witnessed right across Australia, right across the world. And it's this amazing tapestry that binds us all together. And I really believe that these threads are threads of knowledge. And these threads really bind us all together. And we're not individuals. We're actually connected to each other. So I am my brother's keeper and I am my sister's keeper. So one person who's facing disadvantage outside of out of our cities, on the other side of the world, that's not a stranger to me. That's someone I care about. That's someone I believe in. That's someone whose potential I know exists. For one person who struggles under the face of adversity, that adversity doesn't just impact that one person, that adversity impacts me. Rolling back the Racial Discrimination Act in 74 of our communities, our most vulnerable communities, doesn't just impact those communities, it impacts our community here. That one person whose rights are denied, one person who flees war-torn, oppression, danger to come to our country, that oppression, that danger doesn't just impact that one person, it impacts us. And this belief of equality, this belief of respect and fairness is something that we all should believe in. And this is a vision that we all should believe in and understand. Because this is a vision that we as a nation can achieve. Thank you.